Hello, everyone. Thank you for having us today. My name is Joseph Oliveros, and I'm with the International Federation of Red Cross Red Crescent Societies. I'm responsible for innovation in cash and voucher assistance. If you could please turn to the next slide. I am also the technical lead of the Dignified Identities and Cash Assistance Project, or DIGIT for short. The project is governed by a consortium of NGOs, namely Norwegian Red Cross, Norwegian Refugee Council, Norwegian Church Aid, and Save the Children Norway. These are organizations coming together to try to identify the opportunities and risks of digital ID and humanitarian action. So why are digital IDs important for the humanitarian sector? First, there are over 1 billion people with no official identification, and their vulnerabilities increase when they are affected by disasters and crises. These vulnerable populations are who we attend to. Second, identity is very basic in our work. We register people in need, and we use their identity details to authenticate them when we distribute aid. Third, we collect a lot of personal data. Some are very sensitive, which could put a person or a family in danger when accessed inappropriately. We ask community members if they have concerns about our organization collecting their data, and their answer depends on their context. But many of them have said that they have no issues because they trust the Red Cross or the Red Crescent. They trust that we have their best interest because we are close to their communities and we provide much needed assistance. But this trust is very fragile. Organizations, therefore, have much more responsibilities to ensure people's information are kept safe and private. Otherwise, it could put the most vulnerable at even greater risk, or as well as reputational damage to our organizations. We see examples of that now in Afghanistan and Bangladesh. We have a responsibility to ensure people have access to their data, if not full control or agency. We need to strengthen privacy and data protection, and we as humanitarian sector need to work together to make sure that these humanitarian issued IDs are recognized by other humanitarian actors, which relates to interoperability, instead of developing siloed solutions. The DIGIT project has been piloting in Kenya the use of digital IDs for people with no official IDs to receive cash assistance. Our second phase will apply digital IDs in a migration context. This is why we embarked on this research with my colleague Nadia Khoury to be informed of the potential consequences and risks of digital IDs and allow vulnerable migrants to receive essential services in a dignified manner. This research involved a global consultation with migration experts and key stakeholders in the humanitarian space. Over 20 organizations and over 80 individuals were consulted. And we plan to use the outcomes of this study for our DIGIT project to better understand the identification needs of migrants throughout their journey, so we're able to maintain not only their trust, but also their dignity. Over to you, Nadia, to share our findings and recommendations from this global consultation.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as Joseph mentioned, a global consultation was carried out on 5 continents to research the different use cases, as well as the benefits and risks of digital identities, and better understand the current concepts and technologies that are being used at the moment in existing humanitarian situations. In terms of the methodology, there were 3 key methods that were used. First, there was a desk-based, non-exhaustive literature review, which focused on existing digital identities used to provide humanitarian assistance to migrants. Secondly, we carried out expert interviews in 3 different languages in different migration contexts. And thirdly, we carried out very scope-limited end-user interviews with refugees registered in 2 European countries. Just as a point of terminology, in the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, we have quite a broad term for migrant. For us, migrants is absolutely anybody who's on the move. They include refugees, internally displaced people, people who may be displaced because of conflict or disaster, or people who are simply seeking to improve their life conditions. So we looked at a large variety of different migration scenarios. So the idea of these consultations were to provide us with the insights from different experts involved in the response to migration scenarios, both at headquarters, but also at field level, to understand really also the differences between a theoretical or technical viewpoint and the real implementation in the field of these different digital identity tools. Here we wanted to share 4 key findings which relate to the social and cultural aspects of digital identities in a trust context. First, we found that a broad range of humanitarian services are provided to vulnerable people on the move at different stages of their journey, at their point of departure, whilst they're in transit, at points where they might be settled, and while they choose to return. Now, these different humanitarian services, which also range from immediate emergency assistance to attend really basic needs, such as access to water, access to food or shelter, access to emergency health services, but also services that have a stabilization or integration focus, such as livelihoods. Access to these services tend to be conditioned on migrants sharing their identity or proving their identity. Of course, humanitarian agencies will always try and assist the most vulnerable in any way. And if people do not have identity, most of the organizations we spoke to find alternative means to provide them with assistance or refer them. However, we did find that this requirement creates challenges in providing services to people who really need them, and that then complicates those people's access to humanitarian assistance. This in turn calls for reflection from humanitarian organizations like ourselves for the reasons for which identity data are collected and processed, and how this need to collect identity is balanced with a migrant's right to privacy and the overwhelming humanitarian objective, which is ensuring that the most vulnerable are assisted. Also recognizing that very often the most vulnerable people may not have their identity documents, and particularly when we're talking about people on the move, these can get lost, they can get stolen, and many people will just not have them. Also because some of them may come within that estimated 1 billion people that Joseph mentioned who do not have identity documents in this world. The second key finding is that there was no fully agreed definition of what is a digital identity in the humanitarian sector. This created an obstacle to having a common approach amongst humanitarian agencies and common objectives on how solutions could be used in the migration scenario. We also did find that there is a very wide spectrum of different digital identity solutions used in the context of migration and as used by humanitarian agencies, which then provides a potential for creating interoperable solutions between different humanitarian actors as being a key focus of the DIGIT project. Third, we found that providing a digital identity for vulnerable migrants could be life-saving in the case where those people don't have access to identity documents. Firstly, because it can allow them easier access to humanitarian services in the event of having an interoperable solution, which is widely accepted. Secondly, ideally with a solution which would be self-sovereign, it could empower migrants to better control their own personal data in the way that many of us do ourselves. In terms of humanitarian agencies and the advantages for them, issuing digital identities could allow them to save time and money rather than having to use different solutions and re-register people that they attend at different parts of their journey. With time savings, humanitarian agencies can focus more on the services being provided because, believe it or not, when we have to attend hundreds of people who pass through a humanitarian service point in a single day, it takes a lot of time and money and human resources to make sure that we register those people and that we remain accountable for our work and for the people that we attend to. Fourthly, that would enable humanitarian agencies to facilitate access to services and enable referral services to migrants in need in a more efficient manner. And ideally, what we hope is that it would avoid a constant collection of personal data for people who go through points of attention and allow for more dignified treatment for those migrants. On the other side of the coin, there's a number of risks and challenges that relate to the use of identities in the humanitarian context. No surprise there that they include data protection issues, privacy issues, the cost and time of investment, the need for training of personnel, and also a lack of technical understanding of solutions within the humanitarian community. The final finding we wanted to share refers to the need for ensuring an inclusive approach in developing and implementing a digital identity solution for vulnerable people on the move. So first of all, any solution has to recognize and be adapted to migrants' varying level of literacy, and that includes digital literacy, so that they're able to use a solution even if they're not able to read, or if they're not able to read a particular language. Secondly, it has to take into account people's varying access to information. Access to information is often closely related to access to humanitarian assistance. And without information, often people are not able to obtain the support that they need. And access to information will often vary depending on people's status, their ability to speak a language, to communicate, or simply where they are at a particular time. In terms of inclusivity, the solution needs to take into account varying people's access to digital means and connectivity. Of course, access to digital means will vary in different countries and different contexts, and there still remain vast parts of the world where people walk through where there are no connectivity services. And finally, the impact of age, gender, and other individualities also have an impact and are key factors to be taken into account when developing an inclusive solution. So these really need to be explored through engagement with the affected communities, because these will vary according to context and culture of each different community and within each community itself. Crucially, we would suggest that there needs to be an alternative, non-digital solution available for people who ultimately may not be able to provide informed consent to using a digital identity. The key point for us here is that for humanitarian agencies, consistent with their mandate to attend the most vulnerable people, we and other humanitarian agencies should not be co-developing or using digital identity solutions which actually serve to exclude people in need from receiving humanitarian assistance. Next slide, please. And here we wanted to share 5 key recommendations that came out of this research. First of all, humanitarian organizations working on digital identities should favor a long-term vision on digital identities, ideally framing these in guiding principles or a framework strategy. And this is to ensure internal and external accountability. Second, we recommend that organizations follow a model of cooperation or consortia, which has clear governance structures, and again, in terms of accountability, and that incorporates relevant expertise in advisory and decision-making functions. Thirdly, humanitarian organizations that seek to use digital identities should build trust at various different levels. First, they should build trust externally with the populations that are being assisted. And obviously, this has been a recurring theme in this conference. Secondly, they should build trust internally within the humanitarian organization itself in deploying a solution that staff across all different levels are comfortable using and trust. Thirdly, trust should be built with different humanitarian agencies when seeking interoperability. And finally, trust also has to be built with national or regional authorities in those areas where a digital identity is being deployed. The fourth recommendation is the need to carry out internal and external advocacy about the needs for data collection, hopefully the minimal needs for data collection, and data minimization, taking into account the need for privacy of the individuals who are being attended, and balancing that against the reasons for which data is collected, and crucially, in some cases, the risk of theft or fraud. Finally, we recommend that any digital identity solution that's developed in the migration sector should carefully consider the vulnerabilities of migrants, and in some cases, that might render their profile unsuitable for a digital identity, in which case a non-digital solution should ideally be used. So with this, we wish to conclude with reminders that the digital identities are also a growing area of interest in the humanitarian sector. We see that there's considerable potential for greater collaboration in future years around shared challenges and shared opportunities. And we hope to keep on collaborating and innovating in this field. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. That was very insightful. Thank you. Very interesting topic as well. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to ask my question because there's quite a few waiting for you. So let's just dive in and find the first one. Okay, so from Nikki Hickman, we have, did anything in your research look at verifier authentication? In other words, verifying an NGO or aid worker? Or was it just looking at the focusing, was it just focusing on verifying refugees?
Thank you for that question. We just looked at verifying the identities of people on the move. We do have a partner organization that has been looking at verifying the identities of their volunteers. So they've been working a lot on that, again, to facilitate the registration of volunteers and their deployment in different states across a country. So it's something that has been looked into, but we decided in this case to really focus on the people to whom we attend.
Makes perfect sense. Thank you. Okay, another question from Lynette Taylor. How do you find your frame accountability in the humanitarian sector, which isn't answerable to laws on data protection, discrimination, or really anything? How do you respond to that?
Joseph, would you like to take a stab at that?
Sure. Yeah, accountability is a very important piece for us. You know, reputational damage, of course, and getting for donors to be able to trust us with their funding is, you know, very key to how we operate. But also, more importantly, really accountability to the people who are in need, who we are providing assistance on a daily basis. I think from a data protection perspective, there are certain organizations, international organizations, for instance, who are not bound by specific laws, such as the GDPR, for instance, because of certain privileges and immunities, which we're not going to go into detail here. But at the end of the day, when we do operate on a country level, there is still that sense of accountability to make sure that we enforce, you know, strict assessment in terms of what could potentially be the risks to the end recipients. There is a data protection handbook for humanitarian action that has been developed by the ICRC and the Brussels Privacy Hub, for instance, which really details, you know, how data protection in our line of work translates to, and we're developing practical guidance on that. So there are certain things definitely that we're taking a look at, even when some of the international organizations who may not be bound by these specific laws are not covered. There are still a sense or senses that we do need to do that on a ground level, on a field level, for instance.
Thank you. I've got a couple more questions for you, sorry, if that's okay. I think you've answered that nicely. Question from Henk Marman. Did you apply any framework of development from the more philosophical area, like capabilities approach? Or did you select another framework or general principles? Any frameworks?
No, we didn't. No, we did very straightforward interviews with key informants, but looking very broadly at at their experience of using digital identities in the humanitarian migration sector. So we sent out 7 guiding questions to all the key interviewees and had 1 or 2 hour interviews with them, as well as the literature review that was mentioned.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Final question from Emrys Shoemaker. How does the IFRC imagine resolving the challenges created by the organisation's distinct federated structure, especially challenges in terms of diversity, of capacity and goals?
Joseph, would you like to take that one? Hi,
Sure
Emrys.
thing.
Nice to hear from you.
Yeah, no, really good question. So we are certainly a federation of 192 national societies, and I know that there are other organizations that are structured the same way. For us, one of the key things is to recognize the diversity, certainly, and the context to which our members are working on. And it's not to create sort of one solution and then push it down, which certain other organizations really are able to. But in a federated membership type of an organization, we really have to work more in a collaborative model, in a coordinated fashion, to try to identify which type of solutions, could potentially be of benefit to the various different contexts that we work in. Secondly, I think we are able to coalesce more on the principles. So be it around the fundamental principles of the Federation, and really tying that up with, how do we see ourselves and what are the minimum things, standards that we could provide for eventually our end audience, which is really, the people in need who we're serving to. So yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, so Inda, thank you very much. Nadia and Joseph, really appreciate your efforts and joining us today. Really interesting talk, so thank you once again.